Hi, welcome to I Tried to Eat My Phone. I am Karen Dvorsky, and I am joined again today by my good friend Mike Thomas. Mike and I would say we talked about music quite a bit back and forth when we were in high school and college, and I seem to remember a lot of conversations we had about music. Um, I want to start by asking you if you have an album or a CD that you've purchased that you're mildly embarrassed that you own.
That's an interesting question. I will say that when I bought my first stereo as a, 17-year-old, the first thing I ever bought was the Doors' Greatest Hits. And I'm pretty sure that I haven't listened to that in a very long time. So it's funny that music tastes change a lot over the years, and then others, I heard there's a Rolling Stone podcast I like to listen to called Music Now, and one of the
Oh yeah.
music critics, I think I've heard him say twice now that most people, if you ask them what their favorite album is, it's an album that came out when they were between the ages of roughly 18 and 21. And
Yeah.
for me that's true. So
Mm-hmm.
what's funny is your question is kind of just the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I haven't purchased an album in so long
Yeah.
that wasn't something that I knew that I wanted, that there would be no, and I wouldn't say that I'm embarrassed about buying the Doors' Greatest Hits, but it's very cheesy to buy greatest hits. And I was like, oh, it's so economical, look at how much music I get for so little price. But now I'm gonna have to go look and see if I still own it, if I didn't throw it away. But
Right.
I guess that's my answer.
Yeah. That's good. No, I think the greatest hits thing is one of those things that we fall into in a world where we were, kind of created by singles and you know, you had to really um you had to do as much as you could to get the best music all together because you were spending $16 for a CD, so you wanted to get as much as you could for the
Well, and in,
price.
in the 90s, when I was a teenager, it was a very, very different time because you could, of course, you could buy CDs, buy what you wanted. But back then there was the phenomenon of bootlegs.
Uh-huh.
And for me, it was a very interesting time because I was able to meet a few people who could provide me with crazy bootlegs of all kinds of stuff. Mainly for me at the time, it was Led Zeppelin.
Yeah.
So, that doesn't exist anymore. Now you can go to YouTube and you can find live footage of certain bands. Like if you like Dave Matthews, you can be awake for weeks on end and not repeat the same thing. There's tons of stuff out there from
Right.
certain artists. And then until the time when Prince passed away, there was very limited. You couldn't find him on streaming services. He was, so good at controlling his creative content. You couldn't go find something, of his. And so things have changed in so many ways since you and I were at our peak, since you and I were
Yeah.
18 to 21,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot about there's a the comedian Patton Oswalt does a whole thing about if he could go back in time and talk to himself in the early 90s, and he would be like, you see that cassette you have? Okay, so break it in half. And that's this was like 10, 12 years ago, where he was talking about having an iPod, and he was like, break it in half, and then that's the size of what you listen to now. And he's like, my former self would say, well, how many songs can you put on there? And he's like, every song that's ever existed in the entire world. Like, it's a whole different thing. Like, yeah. So,
Yeah.
we kind of grew up in a time where it wasn't quite, yeah. So,
Well, and when Prince died, that was kind of a big for me because he's my favorite single artist of all time. And it really made me think a lot about music and how music has changed in terms of the technology and how our kids are going to consume and be um, opened up to music. So, in particular, at that time when Prince died, I don't know that streaming was quite yet at where it is now. And so a lot of people were buying 9-cent singles. And at the time, I
mm,
was really thinking hard about, when we grew up and when we were teenagers in the 90s, you really didn't have access to singles the way that you do now. We would buy albums, and I was thinking hard about how certain of my favorite artists, it was because I was listening to the whole album, and some of my favorite stuff was stuff that never made it to the radio.
mhm,
And I was thinking, like, here are my kids, and they're listening to all these singles, but they may never get past that. They may only
yeah.
listen to, their favorite artist. They might have only ever listened to 10 songs because if they have limited funds, they're not going to spend them on the whole album. They're going to go buy
Mhm,
more singles. And then it's flipped again because after iTunes and the model of buying single songs, then the sort of current reality of like a Spotify where you're you pay $15 a month for 5 devices, but you get every single thing. And so music has changed a lot for me even this year because I'm watching Core and Springsteen's on, and Springsteen telling his latest is going to hit,
mhm,
and I go put a reminder in my calendar today I'm listening to a new album.
yeah.
And so that's a really, really different experience than, again, we had to be convinced in the 90s that I'm going to pay the full amount for this album. You had to be
Mhm,
convinced, right? You had to listen
yeah.
to a couple songs and say, oh, Springsteen's doing something weird. I don't, where's Clarence Clemens? I don't think I like this. What's with these synthesizers? And you wouldn't buy that album, right? You wouldn't
Yeah.
buy the album. And now you can give everything a try. I saw Dave Grohl on Colbert. He was talking about
Mhm,
some new album, and the
yes.
album's not out, but the first single is. And so I run straight to my streaming service.
Yeah.
And so for those people who have decided they're going to spend the money on a streaming service, it changes everything because there's no barrier anymore. You just go try it. And
Yeah.
if you need to try it 5 or 6 times, the other thing that I've found really nice about having streamings, I'm a cheap guy. I don't like paying $15 for music, but um, I've started to realize some of the benefits. Like I have teenage daughters, and one of my favorite things to do is ask them to make me playlists
Yeah.
of their
Yeah.
favorite stuff.
Yeah.
So, recently I asked my older one to make me a playlist of basically what she listens to before her hockey games. So I'm like, what do you play when you need to get jacked up, right?
Uh-huh.
And sure enough, she sends me a link, and it's this playlist, and it's all kinds of stuff I haven't necessarily heard before, and a
Uh-huh.
lot of it I love. It's great, and I think like this just wouldn't have been possible.
Yeah.
She would have had to make me a cassette, and then
Right.
I'd put the cassette in, and like all that work, right? It like you would, unless you're dating someone, you're not going to do all that work, and you'd have to have access to all of it. So because of streaming services, now I'm a fan of Drake, big fan of
Mm,
Drake. And
mhm.
6 months ago, I couldn't tell you more than 2 or 3 Drake songs that even existed.
Yeah.
And so in a way, it's kind of brought my daughter and I a little closer together
Mhm.
because She's the one that turned me on to Drake.
Mhm,
And I turned my kids on to Dave Matthews, just because I had a hunch that they might like
mhm.
Dave Matthews. And, you make a playlist and you kind of think like, what could I put on this that would really draw them in? What would they like?
Yeah.
And then it's cool because then you just see them like they make it their own and then they start, investigating, going deeper in the catalog. And then it's like really funny when the inverse happens and I'm listening, we're listening in the radio or something, and it's her phone, and now there's some Dave Matthews song I've never heard. And she's
Ah.
like, "Oh man, come on, that's the best one."
No, I love when that happens. Like I agree. Like my girls, they're 14 and 10, and so they bring stuff home and they tell us about songs that are new, and we're kind of like, oh, these are good. And then at the same time, my 10-year-old has a Foo Fighters t-shirt and is like obsessed with Dave Grohl and like, totally into that because we'll watch the videos on YouTube and we can watch, and she'll be like downstairs at night and she'll be like, "Can we watch Run by Foo Fighters?" And I'm like, "Sure, yeah, of course." So it's really fun to see that kind of back and forth. When my older daughter Maria, who's 14 now, when she was like 4, we were at the grocery store one time and she was singing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. And uh or no, actually it was Bridget. Bridget was singing it. And the cashier looked over and she said, "Oh, Twinkle Twinkle, is that your favorite song?" And Bridget goes, "No, my favorite song is Band on the Run." And I was like laughing because I was like, oh, somehow I've by osmosis we have taught her about Paul McCartney and Wings. But it is really fun to see like those interchanges of
Yeah.
what they're into and what we're into. And now there's so much accessibility that you can do that. You can say like, "Oh, hey, have you seen this?" Or, when there's a new premiere of something on YouTube, like a new, the girls get all excited, new Katy Perry video or whatever. And we sit and watch it with them, and it's really fun to like have that exchange. I think that music is a great way to connect, as it always has been.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think streaming, I don't think I understood right away how this was going to enable me to get out of whatever boxes I was in. And because of streaming, in a lot of different ways, I've become huge fan of Missy Elliott, for example. I didn't know
Mm,
anything about
mhm.
Missy Elliott. I didn't know anything at all because none of my friends liked Missy Elliott. And that Super Bowl commercial, I don't know if you're familiar with the one I'm talking about, but there was a couple of
Oh,
years
yes.
ago.
Yeah. Mhm.
And so for years, I've been the DJ for my daughter's hockey team. And so I'm like always on the lookout for good songs I can play at hockey games. And I was like, whoa, what's that song in that commercial? So I figured out the song and then I went and got it and I added it to the playlist. And I have to be careful to get the clean version so that I'm not playing swears, at high school hockey games. But so then it made me like, okay, I'm going to go listen to the top 5 Missy Elliott songs in terms of popularity.
Mhm.
And then, I'm like, that's not enough. I need more. Like, wow, she's really good. And that's just one example of where the ability to have everything just right there. And now we decide, again, if you have streaming
Mhm.
capability, you decide what you want to listen to. I decide what I want to listen to. And it's no longer the radio DJ who is saying, well, here's what you can listen to if you'd like to.
Right. Right.
Um, and so I think um, I've definitely changed in that now I still have my old favorites, and the
Mm.
the odd thing going back to what we were talking about with bootlegs, some of my favorites they don't exist on Spotify. They don't exist on YouTube. They don't exist
Mhm.
anywhere online. Um, you know, my favorite band of all time is Living Color. And
Ah,
they're not
yes.
very popular, you know. They
Yeah.
like like my friends that like them, when we go to see them, we hang out after the show and we get to talk to them. It's really, really
Mm.
awesome. And even back in the 90s, we would go backstage, or, you know, behind where we knew the only exit was for the artists. And they, you know, the lead guitar player once told us, when I asked them, I'm like, you know, we just can't get enough. And he told me, well, like there's an import from Japan you might be able to find, um, of some live stuff. And we found it. It was ridiculously expensive and it was phenomenal. It's still one of my favorite albums of all
Wow.
time, but it's a Japanese import. So I still have to play
Wow.
it on a CD player, you know?
Oh, that's cool. I love that. Well, that's what I was going to ask you. What was the first, uh, well, yeah, first album or CD that you bought on your own? Like,
Yeah, that
what'd
was
you go out and buy?
that Doors greatest hits debacle, because a friend of mine knew I was buying my first stereo and he lent me all kinds of his CDs.
Mhm.
But I think when I started, like my first cassettes were Prince. You know,
Mm.
it was Purple Rain and that kind of thing. I was huge into Prince, and I still am.
Uh-huh.
But when I was in like grade school, that's when Purple Rain was out. And so the first cassettes I bought were Prince. The first CDs were probably, you know, classic rock kind of stuff,
Mhm.
and then some Living Color and mostly rock. And then,
Yeah.
you know, I got to college, I started buying Miles Davis and John Coltrane, and,
Mm. Hmm.
you know, getting a little bit, um, into jazz and
Yeah.
you know, spreading out a little bit. But, you know, a lot of Dylan and Rolling Stones and,
Hmm.
you know, Zeppelin, that kind of thing.
I remember when you and Andy and I used to email each other, which you were some of the first people that I emailed. I think we talked about this last time a little bit, but that, like, it was a big deal to have an email account. And you two were some of the first people I knew that had an email account. And we would email back and forth and give each other a hard time about football. But I do remember at one point saying, sending an email and it had something about Led Zeppelin. And you were like, can you learn to spell it right? Because I think I spelled Zeppelin wrong. And you were like, you need to. I was like, oh my gosh, yes, I totally spelled it wrong. But I think of that every time I look at the albums that we have from them, like the CDs we have. Like, I learned how to write Led Zeppelin from that email. But that was, I mean, I think that was, I think In Through the Outdoor was one of my first CDs, which is not one of their greatest, but it did have some good riffs on there. I did like some components of it. But when you were talking about like buying the full album, I was like, it was like that and Pink Floyd's Metal. I think that was kind of one that where I just learned, like, just listen to the whole thing through and you'll find what you
Yeah,
like. And
yeah,
it's not always what's, when you were saying about, you know, DJs kind of telling you what to listen to, like, it's kind of fun to find the other tracks that you're like, oh, actually this one appeals to me way more than the one that's popular or is on the radio.
yeah. And for me, there are certain artists, who only exist for me as album artists. Like, other than the song Creep, I really cannot tell you one Radiohead song. And yet there's probably about 5 Radiohead CDs that I can sing along to the entire thing.
Mhm.
So certain artists that, at least weren't on the radio that I listened to. right? They might have been on radio, but they weren't on the stations I listened to. And someone turned me on to them. And I mean, I feel like I have a pretty broad, um, maybe everyone thinks they're open-minded and they have some big broad, but a lot of my favorite artists, I don't find really anyone. Um, I don't know of anyone who likes Living Color and Prince and Fishbone and Radiohead and Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin and Nora Jones and Bob Dylan. And like, I don't like country at all. There's not one bit of country. I can't listen to classical music, but I don't know anyone who likes what I like,
Yeah.
in terms of like, I have a very good friend who also loves Living Color.
Mhm.
But then and we both love Fishbone and we like Prince. And then there's nothing, you know what I mean? There's
Yeah.
no like, and that's fine. But I think I've found that I need to be, by being open-minded and listening to what other people want me to listen to because they love it.
Mhm.
I always thought I wouldn't like Radiohead. And then I had a
Mhm.
guy at work just say, um, you can't say that until you've listened to Kid A. You have to
Mm.
listen to Kid A and then tell me you don't like it. You can tell me you don't like Coldplay because of what you hear on the radio, but listen to this CD. And sometimes they're right, and you go, okay. I mean, Coldplay was like, I kind of liked it, and then it
Mhm.
fell off. And Radiohead's never fallen off for me. I
Yeah.
can listen to Radiohead all the time, and I had no idea that I loved Drake until my daughter put a um, playlist together, and I actually looked at it after a few times through and said, "Oh, these songs that I like the most are all from the same artist.
Mhm.
Now I need to go check this out."
Yeah.
So, um, even though I'm getting older every day and I'm an old curmudgeon, like I've been forced to be more open-minded about music. I haven't been forced to, I guess, but by putting forth very little effort these days, people like you and I, our age, we can very quickly and easily um, be opened up to new artists
Yeah.
and new even genres because it's
Mhm.
so easy and free and quick.
Yeah.
And I really have to say, like, I feel like I've only scratched the surface. I mean, because of streaming music, I'm now a big Missy Elliott fan. I'm a big Drake fan. Um, I've reconnected with artists.
Mhm.
I had like three Nora Jones CDs, and I don't know. I just sort of lost touch. And
Yeah.
just a few weeks ago, like I went to Spotify, I looked her up. I started listening to some CD of hers from I don't know 2018, 2019. Blew my mind. Was like,
Mm.
this is better than any of the other stuff that I already loved.
Yeah.
Um, and so I still feel a little static. I still feel like I don't spend a lot of time. And part of the problem there is I like listening to music out of speakers, not headphones. And
Mhm.
I'm in a house with people who just won't let me listen to my stereo. Like I don't like listening here. I want to listen here. And so
Yeah.
that whenever anyone's out of my house, Karen, I'm like, I turn the stereo on, and my neighbors must be like, come on, man, please don't
We
do
we have we have many times in our house where John is downstairs and the girls close the door because there's Dinosaur Jr. on like volume 20 and they're like click like so so I
that.
understand that feeling or John does especially he likes to I'm a
Well,
headphones person. I like to listen to like I like to be in my own little space with music. And so I tend to listen more on headphones, but John's a big fan of like blasting it on the stereo and like sometimes the girls will come down and listen and then sometimes they'll be like, all right, like shut the door. But did your parents listen to a lot of different music? I mean, no.
no, no. My parents turned me on to nothing. Um, and you mentioned Andy. Andy's parents taught him a lot. I mean, they were listening to Dylan every time I went to visit their house. They were listening to music. Uh, I mean, it's not to say my parents didn't like music. It's just that we didn't like the same thing.
Mhm.
Um, Now at my age, again, there's one or two or three things that I think, um, I look back and with some good memories, I guess. But would I really want to sit and listen to it? No.
Mm.
Almost nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, my dad liked a few things that I think today are pretty cool, like a chorus line or
Mm.
all that jazz.
Chicago and
I don't know what it was about that kind of music that he liked, that
mm.
but they weren't into rock and roll at all. They were
Mm.
not into rock and roll. They were not into jazz. um so my dad liked Buddy Holly. That was it. That's all
Okay.
there was. So i
Did
i learned because I had an older brother and because I had Andy Campbell and Greg
yeah.
Zinman and people around
Yeah.
me who were really into whatever music they were into. They were really into it.
Yeah.
And I mean, Greg was like, um, one day he just popped up and said, "There's a band called Nirvana that's going to change music history."
Yes, I
He was like 6 months ahead of like that.
yeah, at that I remember learning about Nirvana from Jay Schwilly because we were on the yearbook staff together, and that was the year that that album came out, and he
Yeah.
was listening to it and I was like, who is this? And so that was one of the first albums that I remember buying, uh, because it was just he and Mike Hoffman would play it in the yearbook room while they were editing photos and all that kind of stuff, and I was like, oh, this band is actually pretty cool. So, which
Well,
is weird to think back on that time because like it's so over the top now. I mean, it seems silly to think back and go, oh yeah, there was this new band, and we were like, who are these guys? Like,
well,
so
I told Greg like this, okay, I gave him a chance, and this Nirvana just does. It's not. They're not doing it for me. And it was almost like he felt like it was a challenge. So he comes rocking back up a couple days later, and he's like, "All right, Pearl Jam, you're gonna love Pearl Jam. Go check out Pearl Jam." And and he's like, they're like Led Zeppelin, and he was right. I liked Pearl Jam.
yeah.
In the end, there was one night in college when I had to choose between going to see Fishbone and going to see Pearl Jam. And my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, she went to the Pearl Jam show, and I went to the Fishbone show.
That's great. I love that.
Yeah, yeah,
Fishbone does remind me of Jay and Mike. That was,
yeah.
I know they were big
Yep.
fans of them.
He's
So
he's who he's who introduced me to them. Yep.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think we kind of came up in a pretty kind of cool time during music. I mean, everybody thinks that way. I think, when I was asking you about your parents, like my parents, like uh every car trip we took was like, 60s music all the way. And so, the Beatles, Earth, Wind and Fire, Blood, Sweat and Tears, Chicago, like that was all kind of the background of our lives because that was always playing in our house. And they had a lot of record albums and we would play them all the time. And that was a big deal. And my dad still to this day is very like, what are you listening to? What's good now? What do you
Mm,
like?
mm.
And I'll send him like YouTube videos of like, okay, you have to check this band out. This is good. Like, watch this, check this out. And but I remember when I was in college, I think I was maybe a junior. I didn't turn 21 until I was a senior. and someone had given me a fake ID to use, and I only used it once or twice, but I brought it home in the summer, and I was like, oh crap, like I have to hide this. So I stuck it in, I had the Beastie Boys, was it License to Ill?
That
What
was the
was,
first one.
yeah,
Yep. Yep.
I had that CD. So I tucked it into the cover of that CD and put it in all my stuff. My dad borrowed the CD because he was like, oh, he's like, I've heard about these Beastie Boys. I want to check it out. And he's like, oh, someone's driver's license was in here, which I'm sure he totally knew that it was. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh, I don't know.
That's crazy.
Yeah. But I was like, oh, I'm like, I have this dad who's so like trying to be like into cool stuff. And then I was like, dang it. Like, but yeah, but now he'll ask me all the time, like, oh, what do you like? What are you listening to? You know, and I think it's great. I'm like, yeah, here's what we're talking about now. So yeah, it's fun to like share that with them. As much as like you were saying with like our kids sharing stuff with us, like because I tend to be the person watching like the New Year's special and being like, who is this band? I don't know. Who are these people? I don't know who these people are.
Well,
Like,
it's pretty amazing to me that for all this time, um, and I think this is probably a thing where most people remember who turned them on to some artist. Like I
mhm.
can say that I was a Rolling Stones um, fan, but Andy made me and Campbell made me a big Rolling Stones fan because um, because I lived with him for a year. I was listening to what he was listening to, which was um, Exile on Main Street, not Beggar's Banquet, for example. Right? He was listening to different albums, which just were not like what most people, wasn't Let It Bleed kind of thing. And so um, I've always had, I'll always remember, this guy, Alex, who turned me on to Radiohead. I'll
Mhm.
always remember Jay turned me on to Fishbone.
Yeah.
Um, my brother, who was 4 years older than me, he turned me on to a lot of classic rock. And then just when I like sort of it took with me, like around freshman year in high school, he took like a left turn and he went off to Morrissey and like a bunch
Oh,
of,
wow.
yeah, he went like into a different place. He still liked classic rock, but he moved into a much more alternative kind of thing, which I couldn't follow him there. It was like, thanks for
Yeah.
turning me on to classic rock. I'm not going where you're going now. Primus, I can do that, but a lot of this other stuff, I can't do the Smiths, I just can't. And so the fact that anyway, that now, we can't escape the fact that we are parents, but it's cool that like I can say my wife and I have turned my kids on to Foo Fighters.
Mhm.
I've turned them on to Dave Matthews Band, and in return, I love Ariana Grande
Yeah. Yeah.
from my younger daughter,
Yeah.
and I love Drake from my older daughter,
Yeah.
and it's just a different thing, right? We didn't
Yeah.
have this with our parents. It was only one way, if anything, right? With me, I
Mhm.
got almost nothing from my parents, but they definitely got nothing from me.
Yeah.
And now that we have this like, two-way thing, and of course we also benefit from the fact that there's 30 more years of music to
Yeah.
share than
Right.
we had with our parents. But
Right.
um I sort of hope this keeps going. I hope that
Yeah.
um that I still discover stuff and can kind of open my kids up. Like one of my kids totally took to Prince, and the other one was like, it's okay, and you just got to be okay with like, it's not all gonna stick.
Yeah. 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 There's been hits and misses in our house too. And I think what's fun is that when there's a hit, you're like, okay, th- this is cool. Like, it's fun to watch your kids be really into something and, kind of not, you're not shoving it down their throat. It's just kind of by osmosis sometimes. Like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, this is, I mean, Earth, Wind and Fire, like September comes on and the girls are like, Mom, your favorite song. I'm like, I know. Like, how can you not love this song? It's the best song. Um, so it is kind of fun to watch that growth and see them kind of come into that. And it's also fun for us to be like, oh, this is new and I like this. Like,
Yeah.
thanks for telling us about this. So
Yeah.
yeah, we love that. Have you taken your kids to any concerts?
Yeah. Yeah. We for one year my wife said that for her birthday she wanted um us all to go see Foo Fighters. Um so my wife is a bigger Foo Fighters fan than I am, but
Uh-huh.
um I do like them.
Yeah.
They're a band I probably would have seen if I had to on my own, but we have definitely been having this conversation. A lot of the bands we like might not be touring much longer, and we need to be looking for opportunities.
Mhm.
And like I got the opportunity to see the Who a year or two ago, and they're not one of my favorite bands, but um, but I was thinking like, I shouldn't pass up an opportunity to see Pete Townsend in person,
Mhm.
and he did not disappoint at all. And that tour is when they had like an orchestra with them, and
Oh yeah.
so that was
Just a
very
couple
cool.
years ago. Yeah.
Yep, that was very
Okay.
cool. But so we took the kids to see Foo Fighters, and they enjoyed it quite a bit. I mean, when you're in these huge stadium shows, I mean, to me, there's a big difference between, um, like my wife and I went to see Bob Mould. Um, and if you don't know who Bob Mould is, he was, in a band called Sugar for a while. And I mean, he's he's a little bit seemingly of a niche artist to me,
Mhm.
um, but it's kind of cool if you like a guy like Bob Mould. It's kind of cool if you like Fishbone and Living Color, because now you can see them in venues where there's no more than like a couple thousand people.
Mhm.
And so when we saw Bob Mould, he was, I don't know, we were like in the second row, right? I mean, we were right
Mhm.
there. It was like he was right in front of our
So
face.
cool.
And so I'd like to be able to take my kids to some shows that are more intimate, more up
Mhm.
close. And we're just going to have to like find those opportunities,
Yeah.
because when you go to a Foo Fighters show, you have to wear earplugs, and um, hopefully Dave Grohl never sees this, but Dave Grohl can't sing at all. He's awful in concert. I mean, I videotaped a little bit just to kind of like as a reminder, and I went and played it back later, and I was like, he's just screaming. There's no good singing to this.
Mm.
And I know they're going for energy and they're going for like, but um it's just kind of like it didn't, I don't know. The Foo Fighters was, I will say, it was a little bit the whole like show was great, right? But the
Mhm.
music was lacking so much for me, um
Mm.
because when you're a Prince fan, right? Prince never hits a bad note, never. I
Mm.
mean, he is a musician, and I'm not saying Dave Grohl isn't a musician, but Dave Grohl can't sing at all. When it comes to being in some huge stadium show, it sounded awful, really. And you just kind of, you get past it or whatever. But so we have taken them. I think of if that was the only show we've taken them to so far, because between the four of us, honestly, it's hard to get one group that all four of us like,
Right.
and
Right.
we'd like to see Dave Matthews sometime because all four of us like Dave Matthews.
Mhm.
But, again, it's like, it's a little bit, do I want to cut my left arm off? And, when Dave Matthews comes around, what's the venue? And like, um, we've seen Dave Matthews before and it's been a little bit underwhelming, which
Mhm.
is probably surprising because most people think they're such a great live band,
Mhm.
and they are, but when we've seen them, it's a little bit too much Dave and a little bit not enough Matthew's band. Like
Mhm.
his band is so unbelievable that when I
Yeah,
see them, I want them to like jam. I want them to
yeah,
really play their instruments. And
yeah.
instead, it's almost like there's just too much Dave. Um, and and maybe I just got unlucky, when I saw them. And I think the other thing is I don't know, their audience can be a little bit annoying. um, some groups just they
Attract a certain crowd that,
well, yeah, like when
yeah,
everyone around you is just being like immature and bothersome,
yeah,
and it's hard for you to like to enjoy the show because the
yeah.
people in front of you are so annoying.
I when I first moved to Seattle in 1999, one of the first concerts I saw out here. So we have the Gorge, which is a concert venue that's, you drive kind of through the Cascades here and then to the other side of Washington. So Washington, it's like, Seattle, forest, green, and then mountains. And then as soon as you get over the mountains, it's like someone drew a line and it was like, and desert. Like not even just desert, it's just sort of like dry and brown. And so it's a very different environment in Eastern Washington. And so you go over that, and then there's the Gorge, which is like theater venue, and there literally is a drop off a gorge to the river there. And it's an amazing venue. I've heard it compared, like Red Rocks is kind of, I think, the only one that people rank higher than the Gorge as a place to see a band. So we saw Dave Matthews there, and they put on a great show. And I've seen several concerts there since then, but it part of the experience was like just being in that environment, like being outside, and like, it made sense. Like the whole thing kind of worked together. So that was really fun. But I think in general, like when you go to concerts, you're kind of always looking for like, all right, what's going to be the thing that I take home from this? Like, what's going to be my like penultimate point of this? And I think the best concert I've ever seen in recent years was John and I went and saw Chris Cornell before he died, um, downtown at the Paramount Theater here in Seattle. And I, as a speech therapist and as a listener, I was absolutely fascinated by the fact that he had the most clear, like, vocal sounds of any singer I've ever heard live. Like just amazingly pure voice, like just perfectly done. Just such a talent. So so that was really fun to see him before he was gone.
Yeah.
It was really cool. So have you seen Prince, and did you see Prince in concert? Did you say?
Yeah, I was able to see Prince twice. Once at about a 20,000 seat arena, and the other time, I would guess it was more like 12,000 seat. And the time when I saw him at the 12,000 seat arena, he had yeah, he had Shaka Khan with him, and he had
It's awesome.
Larry Graham. Larry Graham was the bass player for Sly and the Family Stone, and Larry Graham was really, really very influential in Prince's life,
Mhm.
in his
Yeah.
music life and in his personal life. Larry Graham, I think, was the guy who turned Prince on to um, a change in the way that Prince thought about God and religion and
Mhm.
spirituality. And so that show was funky as hell because they it was kind of cool. Like Prince got through like the main set, which was, I'm going to give everyone all these like medleys so that they can say that they heard Little Red Corvette and whatever. And then they came out for the encore and they played the funkiest shit ever. And it was like not even Prince songs, you know, some of it was Prince songs, but like, and you just, I do think there's something to the idea that the more bands you see in the more venues, you start to get a better, you can level set a little bit about what you just saw. Because when you see Jack White in Detroit, you know, you see Jack White in his hometown. When you see Prince, when you see like there's certain bands and certain artists that are that purity that you're talking about with Chris Cornell, the musicianship, and you know, who am I, some nobody to like, you know, be saying that some bands don't have it like some others, but there's certain shows that are just kind of uninspiring that you just kind of walk away like, you know, that was okay. And there are other shows like when my wife and I saw the Rock on Tours, you know, that was like, we were like, we need to go see Jack White because we don't know how many chances we're ever going to get. We've never seen him before. And so when the Rock on Tours came back together, I think it was last year, and we've never been at this beautiful historic venue in Detroit. And we were kind of like, when we thought about it, we were like, how could we not have ever been at that theater? This is embarrassing. We have to go to this show. And, you know, I wish we had taken our kids to that show. I think we would have had to pull them dragging, kicking and screaming, you know. So the idea that you have to go to a few different shows and a few different venues to kind of start to get the feel for how live music, I think, is just it's like a huge spectrum of, again, venues and artists. One of my first shows was Andy and I went to see Bob Dylan, and unfortunately Bob just was not, he just wasn't on that night. We surmised that maybe he was a little bit too stoned and it just didn't work, you know. And I was upset because it just wasn't a show that I enjoyed. And I think Andy was a little embarrassed, you know, because Dylan is his guy, you know. Well, then a couple of years later, I went to see Bob Dylan and Santana opened for him. And yeah, I mean, Santana's just, they're so amazing. They're so unbelievable as a live band. Well, then I thought, wow, I don't think Bob Dylan's going to be able to stand up to the performance I just saw from Santana. That was unbelievable. And then Bob Dylan comes out and he just was, I just couldn't believe how good he was. I couldn't believe, it was like, this is why I went to see Bob Dylan. This is why I went to see Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
And so I felt like I had like both sides. They really like, you know, boy, that was really disappointing. I can't believe I was disappointed in a Bob Dylan show. And then, oh yeah, that's what I wanted to see. And that's a show that really sticks out when you can see both Santana and Bob Dylan in one night. And they both just rake. I mean, they were so good.
Yeah.
And I've been to a lot of shows in my life, and that one definitely sticks out. You know, it's not the best show I've ever been to, but it's close. Yeah.
Wow. That sounds like a good one.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, thanks, Mike. I appreciate you talking tonight. And this was fun.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. I loved it.
All right.